The winter chill cut through James Wilson's uniform as he walked up the steps of the Millbrook Police Department. At 62, the cold bothered his knees more than it used to, but he never complained. 34 years on the force had taught him that some pain you just lived with. The building hadn't changed much over the decades. Same brick exterior, same American flag waving out front. What had changed was how it felt to walk inside. James nodded to the desk sergeant, who gave a quick smile before looking away. That was happening more often lately. People who used to stop and chat now just gave quick hellos. The hallways that once felt like home now felt like somewhere he was just passing through. "Morning, Lieutenant," said Officer Chen, one of the younger officers who still showed proper respect. "Morning," James replied, his deep voice carrying down the corridor. "Any excitement overnight?" "Just the usual. Couple drunk drivers, domestic disturbance on Pine Street." James nodded and continued to the break room. He could hear laughter before he reached the door. When he walked in, the room went quiet for a moment. Captain Reynolds was there with his crew, the new guys he'd brought with him when he took over as chief 6 months ago. They all wore tactical unit patches on their shoulders, the unit James had built from scratch 15 years earlier. "Well, if it isn't the department fossil," Reynolds said with a smirk that didn't reach his eyes. "Coffee's fresh, Wilson. Help yourself." James didn't respond to the jab. He'd heard worse over the years, especially when he'd first joined the force back in 1990. Back then, being the only black officer meant dealing with everything from cold shoulders to outright threats. He'd outlasted those people, and he'd outlast Reynolds too. He poured his coffee and left without another word. Dignity was something no one could take from you. You had to give it away. And James had never given an inch. In his small office, recently moved from the main floor to a converted storage room in the basement, James settled in to review reports. The walls were lined with commendations and photographs. 34 years of service captured in frames. There was the hostage situation at First National Bank in '98. James had talked down a desperate man with a shotgun, no casualties, the courthouse standoff in 2005. James had led the tactical response when an escaped prisoner took a judge hostage. His planning had saved lives. The school bus accident of 2010, when James coordinated rescue efforts after a bus full of kids went off Mountain Bridge during a snowstorm. All 26 children rescued. Each picture told a story of service, of making tough calls under pressure, of putting others first. A knock at the door pulled him from his memories. "Come in," he called. Officer Thompson, a 20-year veteran, stepped inside and closed the door behind him. "You hear about the training schedule?" Thompson asked, his voice low. "Not yet," James replied, already knowing he wouldn't like what was coming. "Reynolds has you teaching traffic stops to the rookies next week while the tactical team runs hostage drills at the abandoned factory." James felt the familiar burn of anger in his chest but kept his expression neutral. Traffic stops. After decades of specialized tactical training and experience, they had him teaching traffic stops like he was some fresh academy graduate. "I see," was all he said. Thompson shook his head. "It's not right, James. Everyone knows what he's doing." "And what's that?" James asked, though they both knew. "Pushing you out. Making things so uncomfortable you'll just retire early and save him the trouble of finding a reason to force you out." James looked at the photo on his desk, his late wife Diane smiling back at him from their vacation to the Grand Canyon 5 years ago before the cancer took her. She'd always told him to stand his ground when it mattered. "I've got 3 years until full retirement benefits," James said, "and I earned every penny. I'm not going anywhere until I'm ready." Thompson nodded. "Just wanted you to know. The old guard still got your back." After Thompson left, James pulled out the tactical unit's training manual, the one he'd written himself nearly a decade ago. Reynolds probably hadn't even read it. The new chief had come in with big talk about modernizing the department, but what he really meant was pushing out anyone who didn't fit his vision of what a police officer should look like. James flipped through the worn pages, stopping at the section on hostage negotiations. He'd been teaching these techniques for years. His approach had been adopted by 3 neighboring counties. and now he was being sidelined to teach traffic stops. Later that afternoon, James walked past the briefing room where Reynolds was meeting with the tactical team. Through the glass, he could see them gathered around a table, going over building plans. His team, or what used to be his team. Reynolds looked up and noticed James. With a smirk, he walked to the door and closed the blinds. That night, as James drove home to his empty house, he thought about retirement. Maybe it was time. Maybe fighting this battle wasn't worth it. The force had changed. The respect he'd earned through decades of service seemed to count for nothing with the new administration. He pulled into his driveway and sat there for a moment, engine off, staring at the modest home he'd shared with Diane. They'd never had children, and since she passed, the silence in the house had grown heavier. As he walked to his front door, Mrs. Garcia from next door called out to him. "James, I made too much pot roast again. I left some on your porch." He smiled and waved. "Thanks, Gloria, you're too good to me." "Nonsense. You kept this neighborhood safe all these years. A little pot roast is nothing." Inside, James hung up his jacket and loosened his tie. The house was quiet except for the ticking of the old grandfather clock in the living room. On the mantel were more photos: his academy graduation, fishing trips with friends, Diane laughing on their wedding day. He warmed up Mrs. Garcia's pot roast and sat at the kitchen table with the newspaper. The front page featured a story about rising crime rates downtown. James knew those streets, knew the people who lived there, knew that with the right community policing approach, those numbers could be turned around. But Reynolds didn't want his input, didn't want his experience. As he ate, James made a decision. He wouldn't quit. Not yet. Whatever game Reynolds was playing, James wouldn't make it easy for him. There were still people in this town who counted on him, still officers who respected what he knew. He'd built his reputation on doing the right thing, even when it was hard, especially when it was hard, and right now the right thing was to stay, to weather this storm with the same quiet dignity that had carried him through every other challenge in his life. Little did he know that in just a few weeks, everything would change. A crisis would come that would test not just his resolve, but everything he knew about keeping people safe. The annual Millbrook Police Department Demonstration Day had always been James Wilson's favorite community event. For over 20 years, he'd helped organize it, showing the townspeople that the officers who protected them were also their neighbors and friends. This year was different. For the first time, James wasn't involved in the planning. He wasn't leading the tactical team through their demonstrations. He was just another officer in uniform, standing on the sidelines. The spring morning was perfect. Blue skies, light breeze, temperature in the mid-60s. The kind of day that usually lifted James's spirits. The town park had been transformed with police vehicles, information booths, and demonstration areas. Children ran around with plastic badges pinned to their shirts, and the smell of hot dogs and cotton candy filled the air. "Quite a turnout," Officer Rodriguez said, joining James near the refreshment stand. James nodded. "Town always shows up for this. Good to see. You should be down there with the team," Rodriguez said, nodding toward the roped-off area where the tactical unit was preparing for their demonstration. "Everyone knows it." James shrugged. Orders are orders. He watched as Captain Reynolds moved among the officers, checking equipment and giving last-minute instructions. Reynolds caught James looking and gave a small, satisfied smile before turning away. "Ladies and gentlemen," the announcer's voice boomed over the speakers, "please gather around the main demonstration area. The Millbrook Police Department's elite tactical unit will be performing in 5 minutes." The crowd shifted, parents gathering up children, teenagers putting away phones to watch. James moved closer, standing at the edge of the crowd. He recognized most of the faces around him. The baker who gave him free donuts every Thursday, despite the cliché, the librarian who'd helped him find books for Diane during her illness, the high school principal who regularly invited him to speak to students about law enforcement careers. These were his people. This was his town. The tactical unit filed out in formation, their movements crisp and professional. James felt a flicker of pride. He'd trained most of these officers after all. They might be following Reynolds now, but they still moved the way he'd taught them. Reynolds stepped forward with a microphone. "Welcome, everyone. We're excited to show you the elite training and skills of Millbrook's finest today." The crowd applauded politely. "Before we begin," Reynolds continued, scanning the crowd until his eyes locked on James, "I want to talk about progress, about moving forward." James felt a sudden tension in his shoulders. Something in Reynolds's tone set off warning bells. "Law enforcement is always evolving," Reynolds said. "New techniques, new technologies, new thinking. We can't afford to be stuck in the past." The crowd listened, not yet sensing what James already knew was coming. "Some of our older officers have trouble accepting change," Reynolds said, his voice taking on a mock sympathetic tone. "Take Lieutenant Wilson there, for example." He pointed directly at James. Dozens of heads turned to look. "After 30-some years, we've had to reassign him to more appropriate duties," Reynolds continued. "We don't need dinosaurs on the force anymore." A few awkward chuckles rippled through the crowd. Most people looked uncomfortable, glancing between Reynolds and James. "Some people," Reynolds added, his voice hardening, "just can't accept when their skin color isn't enough to keep them relevant." The words hung in the air. A stunned silence fell over the crowd. Several parents covered their children's ears too late. Officer Rodriguez stepped forward as if to say something, then stopped. James stood perfectly still, his face a mask of dignity. 34 years of service reduced to a racial slur at a community event. He'd faced racism before, whispered comments, passed over promotions, extra scrutiny, but never so baldly, so publicly. Mayor Green, who had been standing near the demonstration area, stepped forward and awkwardly took the microphone from Reynolds. "Thank you, Captain. Let's proceed with the demonstration," she said briskly, her tight smile not reaching her eyes. As the tactical team began their well-rehearsed routine, showing building entries and takedown techniques, the crowd's attention gradually shifted away from James. But he could feel their sideways glances, their whispered conversations. Mrs. Hanson from the flower shop caught his eye and mouthed, "I'm sorry." Mr. Washington, whose teenage son James had mentored, gave him a firm nod of respect. These small gestures helped, but they couldn't erase what had happened. James considered leaving, walking away from the humiliation, but something in him refused to give Reynolds the satisfaction. So he stayed, watching the demonstration with a professional eye, noting the places where the team's formation was sloppy, where their communication broke down. They were good officers, but they needed more training. Training Reynolds clearly wasn't providing. When the demonstration ended and the crowd dispersed to other activities, James made his way toward the parking lot. He'd done his duty by showing up. He didn't need to subject himself to more of this. "Lieutenant Wilson," a voice called from behind him. James turned to see Chief Parker, retired 5 years now, the man who had promoted James to lieutenant in the first place. "Tom," James acknowledged with a nod. The older man fell into step beside him. "That was way out of line." "Yes, it was." "You should file a complaint," Parker said. What Reynolds said. "That's grounds for disciplinary action." James sighed. "And who would handle that complaint?" "Reynolds himself? The mayor who stood there and said nothing? The county review board that's headed by Reynolds' golf buddy?" Parker frowned. "It's not right, James." "No, it's not," James agreed. "But I've got 3 years until full pension. I can weather this storm." "At what cost?" Parker asked. "Your dignity? Your legacy?" They reached James's car, a 10-year-old sedan he kept in immaculate condition. "My dignity isn't for Reynolds to take," James said quietly. "And my legacy isn't about titles or positions. It's about the lives I've helped save, the officers I've trained, the community I've served. Reynolds can't touch that." Parker shook his head. "You always were the better man, James. Too good for that department, if you ask me." As James drove home, the weight of the day settled on his shoulders. He turned on the radio, finding a jazz station that reminded him of evenings with Diane. The familiar melodies helped ease the tightness in his chest. At home, he found a message on his answering machine from Officer Chen. "Lieutenant?" The young officer's voice was tight with anger. "I just wanted to say what happened today was wrong. A bunch of us are meeting at O'Malley's tonight to talk about it. We'd like you to join us. Think about it." James didn't call back. Getting officers to take sides against the chief would only make things worse for everyone. This wasn't their fight. Instead, he changed into civilian clothes and drove to the cemetery where Diane was buried. He didn't visit as often as he should, but today he needed her calm wisdom more than ever. Sitting on the bench near her grave, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, James made a decision. He would finish out his time, quietly, with dignity. He would do the job assigned to him, no matter how beneath his skills. And when the time came to retire, he would walk away knowing he had never compromised who he was. Little did he know that the crisis that would change everything was just around the corner. 3 weeks had passed since the police demonstration day. James sat at his desk in the basement office, filling out retirement paperwork. After the public humiliation, something had shifted inside him. Maybe it was time to step aside, to find peace in his remaining years rather than fight a battle he couldn't win. The forms asked for his reason for retirement. James tapped his pen against the desk, considering what to write. Hostile work environment seemed too dramatic. Personal reasons too vague. In the end, he simply wrote, "Completed service." As he signed the last page, the station's alarm system blared to life. 3 long tones, the signal for an all-hands emergency. James set down his pen and reached for his radio. "Wilson to dispatch. What's the situation?" "Hostage situation at Millbrook Community Hospital." The dispatcher's voice crackled back, tension evident even through the static. "East Wing, 3rd floor. Unknown number of hostages." James was on his feet before the transmission ended, years of training kicking in automatically. He grabbed his jacket and headed for the door, then paused. This wasn't his call anymore. Reynolds had the tactical team now. James was just a desk officer counting down to retirement. He was halfway back to his chair when the radio crackled again. "All available units respond to Millbrook Community Hospital." Repeat, all available units. All available units. That included him. 5 minutes later, James pulled into the hospital parking lot, which was already filling with police vehicles, ambulances, and news vans. He could see officers establishing a perimeter, keeping onlookers and reporters at bay. James made his way to the command post, a police van set up near the entrance. Captain Reynolds was there, surrounded by tactical team members, looking at building plans spread across a portable table. "3rd floor is mostly patient rooms, officer," Lee was saying. 2 nurse stations, medication room, utility closets." "How many hostages?" Reynolds asked. "Hospital security says at least 12. 2 nurses, a doctor, 7 patients, and 2 visitors. One of the patients is a child." James felt a chill run down his spine. A child. The stakes couldn't be higher. Reynolds didn't acknowledge James's presence. "What do we know about the suspect?" "Name's Richard Grayson, 38, former military. Did 2 tours overseas. Hospital records show he's been treated for PTSD. Came in for a regular appointment, then snapped when told his doctor was called away for an emergency." "Weapons?" "He took a security guard's sidearm. Hospital security says he's also claiming to have explosive devices." Reynolds cursed under his breath. "All right, we go in through the service entrance, work our way up to the 3rd floor, and—" "Sir," Officer Chen interrupted, "the suspect has blocked the stairwells. Hospital security tried that approach already. He's got some kind of tripwires set up." "Tripwires?" Reynolds looked baffled. "How would he have those?" James knew the answer, but stayed silent. This wasn't his operation. "We'll use the elevator." "Then," Reynolds decided, "get the power cut to all elevators except the service one. We'll send a team up." "That won't work," James said quietly. All eyes turned to him. Reynolds frowned. "Nobody asked for your input, Wilson. If he set up tripwires in the stairwells, he'll have the elevators covered too. James continued, ignoring the dismissal. This isn't a standard hostage situation. The tactics he's using, they're specialized. And how would you know that? Reynolds demanded. Because I've studied these scenarios. This matches the pattern of an anti-entry defense taught to certain military special forces. They're designed to counter standard SWAT approaches. Reynolds waved a dismissive hand. This isn't the time for your war stories, Wilson. We have a situation to handle. As if to punctuate his words, a muffled explosion sounded from inside the building. Everyone froze. The radio crackled. Command post, this is Team 2. We've got a man down, some kind of explosive device in the north stairwell. Officer Davis has shrapnel wounds to the leg and arm. Reynolds's face paled. He turned to the building, plans suddenly looking less confident. James stepped closer to the table. That'll be just the first one. If he's using the training I think he is, he'll have set up a series of defenses, each one designed to slow you down, make you more cautious, buy him time. And what would you suggest? Reynolds asked, his tone still dismissive but with an edge of uncertainty now. Before James could answer, another call came through. Command post, Team 3. We've found a device attached to the service elevator doors. Looks like it's rigged to detonate if the doors open on the 3rd floor. Reynolds looked at the building plans, then at his team, then back at the plans. James could see the man was out of his depth. Another radio call. Command, this is Negotiator. I've established contact with the suspect. He's demanding to speak with someone who actually understands what he's been through. His words. Says he won't talk to, quote, civilian cops playing soldier. James recognized the tactic. This wasn't just a man who'd snapped. This was someone using his training deliberately. He's creating a situation where your usual tactics won't work, James said quietly. He's forcing you to adapt to his scenario, not the other way around. Reynolds glared at him, but there was fear behind the anger now. If you're so smart, what's his next move? He'll start making impossible demands. When you can't meet them, he'll threaten a hostage. But he won't kill anyone yet. He wants to draw this out. He's following a playbook. As if on cue, the negotiator's voice came through again. Suspect demands a helicopter on the roof and passage to Canada. Says we have 1 hour or he starts shooting hostages. Reynolds looked at James, the hostility in his eyes now mixed with grudging respect. You've seen this before. Not in person, James admitted. But I've studied these scenarios extensively. Back when I was running the tactical unit, I created training modules based on these exact situations. The hospital's chief of security hurried over to their table. We've got a problem. The 3rd floor east wing has oxygen lines running through the walls for the patient rooms. If those explosive devices are real and one goes off near a line, the whole floor could go up, Reynolds finished, running a hand through his hair. Christ. James felt no satisfaction at being proven right. There were lives at stake. Innocent people who happened to be in the wrong place when a troubled veteran finally broke. A commotion at the perimeter drew their attention. The police. Commissioner had arrived along with the mayor. They made their way quickly to the command post. What's the situation? The commissioner demanded. Reynolds gave a quick, somewhat sanitized briefing that skipped over his failed attempts to enter the building. When he finished, the commissioner turned to James. Lieutenant Wilson, you're still on active duty. What's your assessment? Reynolds started to object, but the commissioner silenced him with a look. James took a deep breath. Sir, we're dealing with a hostage-taker who has specialized military training. He's using anti-tactical team protocols that most police departments aren't familiar with. Standard approaches will fail and potentially get hostages killed. Do you know how to counter these protocols? The commissioner asked. James nodded slowly. Yes, sir, I do. He could feel Reynolds staring daggers at him, but that didn't matter now. What mattered were the 12 lives hanging in the balance inside that hospital. Then I'm giving you operational control of this situation, the commissioner said firmly. Captain Reynolds, you will assist Lieutenant Wilson. Reynolds's face flushed with anger, but even he knew better than to argue with the commissioner during an active crisis. James looked up at the hospital building, where somewhere on the 3rd floor, a desperate man was holding innocent people at gunpoint. The retirement papers on his desk suddenly seemed very far away. I'll need the building's ventilation plans, James said. And get me everything we have on Richard Grayson's military service. The crisis that would change everything had begun. The command center transformed within minutes of James taking control. Gone was the frantic, disorganized atmosphere. In its place, a focused calm spread as James divided officers into specialized teams, each with clear objectives. I need to know exactly where everyone is inside, James said, standing over the hospital floor plans. Do we have contact with anyone on the third floor besides the hostage taker? Officer Chen nodded. One of the nurses has been texting security. She's hiding in a bathroom with a patient. Says she can hear the suspect pacing the hallway. Good. Ask her if she can safely take photos of any devices she sees in the hallway. Tell her not to risk being caught. As Chen relayed the message, James turned to the hospital's head of maintenance. Tell me about the ventilation system for the third floor. The maintenance chief pointed to the blueprints. Main air handlers are here and here, but he's in the east wing, which has separate controls due to the oxygen-enriched rooms. James nodded. That's useful. Very useful. He felt a presence at his shoulder and turned to find Reynolds watching him, arms crossed, face tight with barely controlled anger. Something to add, Captain? James asked. This is still my department, Wilson. The commissioner may have given you operational control, but when this is over, you still answer to me. James held the man's gaze. Right now, all that matters are those 12 people up there. Everything else can wait. Before Reynolds could respond, Officer Lee rushed over. Lieutenant, we've got Grayson's military records. He was Force Recon, specialized in counterinsurgency operations. James's suspicions were confirmed. That explains the tactics. He's treating this like a defensive position in hostile territory. He turned to the officers gathered around him. Listen up. This changes our approach. He's expecting a frontal assault. He's prepared for it, has traps set. We're not going to give him what he's expecting. He pointed to the blueprints. Standard procedure would be to attempt entry from multiple points simultaneously. That's exactly what he wants. To divide our forces, make us predictable. James traced a finger along the ductwork. Instead, we'll establish communication as our primary strategy. While he's focused on the negotiator, we'll gather intelligence and find his blind spots. Officer Rodriguez frowned. But sir, the 1-hour deadline is a tactic, James finished. He wants us rushing, making mistakes. We'll negotiate, ask for proof the hostages are unharmed, request more time. Meanwhile, we'll be working on our real approach. James divided the officers into teams. Intelligence gathering, technical support, negotiation, tactical response, with each group having specific roles, rather than everyone trying to do everything at once. Chen, you're our primary negotiator. You've got military background, right? Chen nodded. 6 years Army. Good. When you talk to him, use military terminology. Establish a connection based on shared experience. Don't make promises we can't keep, but keep him talking. To the tactical team, he said, I want you ready but not visible. No tactical gear where he might spot it from windows. Regular uniforms only for anyone he might see. The commissioner, who had been watching silently, stepped forward. You think he's watching us? I know he is, James replied. Hospital rooms have views of the parking lot. He's assessing our response, looking for signs of our strategy. We need to show him what he expects to see. Confusion, standard protocols, predictable movements. James pointed to the service entrance. Meanwhile, we'll have a team enter here, through the basement, not to approach the third floor yet, but to access the building's systems. As the teams dispersed to carry out their assignments, James felt a tap on his shoulder. It was Mrs. Patel, one of the hospital administrators. Lieutenant Wilson, she said, her voice tight with worry. One of the hostages is my sister. She works as a night nurse, please. James placed a gentle hand on her arm. I understand. We're going to get everyone out safely. That's a promise. It was a promise he intended to keep, though he knew better than to make such guarantees. But the woman needed hope, and sometimes hope was as important as tactical plans. Over the next 30 minutes, James's approach began to show results. Chen established a rapport with Grayson, getting him to extend his deadline by another hour. The nurse hiding in the bathroom sent photos showing the locations of 3 explosive devices in the hallway, and the team in the basement had gained access to the building's environmental controls. "He's got the main hallway blocked," James told the tactical team, showing them the nurse's photos. "But we've identified a path through the rooms themselves. The walls between patient rooms are standard drywall. We can create access points if needed." Reynolds, who had been watching from the periphery, stepped forward. "You're being too cautious, Wilson. We could rush him now that we know where the devices are." James shook his head. "That would put the hostages at maximum risk. He's expecting a frontal assault. What he's not expecting is this." He pointed to the ventilation system controls that the basement team had accessed. "We can gradually increase the temperature in the east wing. Not enough to harm the hostages, but enough to make Grayson uncomfortable, distracted. Meanwhile, we'll have Chen keep him talking, focusing on the main entrance, while we prepare a distraction at the far end of the wing." Officer Lee nodded in understanding. "So while he's focused on 2 points, we come in from a third." "Exactly. But we don't breach until everything is in position. Patience is key here." An hour later, the plan was in motion. The temperature in the east wing had climbed 5 degrees, enough to make Grayson remove layers, become slightly less alert. Chen had him engaged in a lengthy discussion about his military service, building a connection while gathering useful information about his state of mind. And James had personally led a small team through the ceiling access panels from the floor below, carefully making their way toward the hostage area. In the tight space above the ceiling tiles, James moved slowly, careful not to make noise. Decades of experience had taught him patience. Rushes to action got people killed. Methodical planning saved lives. From his position, James could hear Chen's voice through Grayson's phone below. "I understand that feeling. Coming back to civilian life, nobody gets it, nobody understands what we've been through." "Exactly." Grayson's voice was strained but engaged. "They look at you like you're damaged goods, like you're a bomb about to go off. And then they give you pills instead of real help," Chen continued. "They think that fixes everything." While this conversation continued, James signaled to his team. 2 officers carefully removed ceiling tiles in rooms on either side of the hallway where Grayson was holding most of the hostages. Through the opening, James could see into one of the patient rooms. An elderly man lay in the bed with what appeared to be his wife sitting beside him, both looking terrified but unharmed. James put a finger to his lips, then showed them a note. "Stay calm. Help coming. Do not alert suspect." The woman's eyes widened, but she gave a tiny nod of understanding. In his earpiece, James heard the report from the team at the far end of the wing. "Distraction ready on your command, Lieutenant." Everything was in place. Now came the moment of truth. The coordinated action that would determine whether everyone walked out alive. "Chen," James whispered into his radio. "Ask him about his time overseas. What was the hardest part for him?" As Chen redirected the conversation, pulling Grayson deeper into his memories, James gave the command. "Execute distraction in 3, 2, 1. A loud crash sounded from the far end of the wing. Just as they'd planned, it sounded like someone had accidentally knocked over equipment. What was that? Grayson's voice went from conversational to alert in an instant. "Probably just the rescue teams getting impatient," Chen said smoothly. "You know how these SWAT guys are. All action, no thinking." Through the ceiling opening, James could see Grayson in the hallway now, gun raised, backing toward the sound, away from the hostages gathered in the main reception area. "Now," James whispered into his radio. In perfect unison, his team dropped into the rooms on either side of the hallway. From there, they could access the hostages without crossing Grayson's line of sight. James himself dropped into the room with the elderly couple, moving silently to the door. Through the small window, he could see Grayson's back as the man cautiously approached the source of the noise, weapon raised. For James, 34 years of experience came down to this moment. Lives hung in the balance. One wrong move, and people would die. He took a deep breath and prepared to act. James Wilson's hand rested on the door handle, his breathing slow and measured. Through the small window, he could see Grayson moving cautiously toward the distraction at the far end of the hallway. The hostage-taker's attention was fully diverted. Exactly as planned. "All teams in position," James whispered into his radio. "On my mark, begin extraction of hostages. Remember, silence is essential." His team leaders acknowledged with single clicks on their radios. No voices that might alert Grayson. Years of training had prepared them for moments like this, when lives hung on silent coordination. James gave a 3-finger countdown, then opened his door just enough to slip through. Across the hall, 2 other officers did the same from their positions. They moved like shadows toward the main area where most of the hostages were gathered, their footsteps cushioned by the soft-soled tactical boots James had insisted everyone wear. The hostages' eyes widened as the officers appeared. A young woman started to speak, but James quickly raised a finger to his lips. He handed out small cards his team had prepared. "Remain calm, move silently, follow officers." The officers began guiding hostages in small groups toward the safe rooms where team members waited to help them through the ceiling access points. James stayed at the edge of the reception area, watching Grayson down the hallway while coordinating the evacuation. The first group, 3 patients who could walk unassisted, moved silently into the nearest room. The second group included a doctor and a visitor. Methodically, silently, the room began to clear, but the most challenging cases remained. An elderly patient connected to a portable oxygen tank, a young boy no more than 10, trembling with fear, and a nurse who had been injured, her arm roughly bandaged, unable to climb without assistance. "Lieutenant," came a whisper in his earpiece. "Officer Lee reporting a problem. The elderly patient in room 302 can't be moved through the ceiling. Medical equipment is too bulky." James considered his options. 8 hostages evacuated, 4 remaining. The 3 difficult cases plus another nurse who had refused to leave her patients. At that moment, Grayson's voice echoed down the hallway. "Something's not right. It's too quiet." James could hear the suspicion in the man's tone. Their window was closing. "Chen," James whispered into his radio. "We need more time. Keep him engaged." "Roger that," Chen responded before speaking louder to Grayson. "Hey, Richard, talk to me. You mentioned your brother earlier. Is he also a veteran?" But Grayson wasn't taking the bait. "Something's happening. I can feel it." The sound of quickening footsteps told James that Grayson was returning to check on the hostages. They were out of time. "New plan," James said quietly to the officers with him. "Get the remaining hostages into room 304, now." As the officers hurried the remaining hostages through the door of room 304, James stepped into the hallway, directly into Grayson's path. The hostage-taker froze, gun raised. "Who the hell are you?" James held his hands up, open and non-threatening. "Lieutenant James Wilson, Force Recon?" Grayson's eyes narrowed. "How did you—" "Your tactics, the defense perimeter, the tripwires, classic Force Recon training." James kept his voice calm, conversational, as if they were just 2 veterans talking. Impressive work. Most police departments wouldn't have recognized what they were walking into. Confusion flickered across Grayson's face. "You're not tactical team." "Not anymore. But I used to run the unit. Studied military tactics extensively. Recognized your approach right away." James could see the wheels turning in Grayson's mind. The man was evaluating him, trying to determine if he was a threat or possibly an ally. "Where are the hostages?" Grayson demanded, gesturing with his gun toward the now empty reception area. "I moved them," James said simply. "They're safe. It's just you and me now." "You're lying." Grayson's voice rose in panic. "They were my insurance." "You don't need insurance, Richard. You need someone to listen, really listen." James took a calculated risk and lowered his hand slightly. "The system failed you, the VA failed you, the doctors with their pills and their 15-minute appointments failed you. I get it." "You don't know anything about me," Grayson said, but his gun hand trembled slightly. "I know you didn't hurt any of the hostages, even though you could have. I know you set up perimeter defenses to keep people out. not to cause maximum casualties. You're not a killer, Richard. You're a soldier who needs help. Grayson's eyes darted around, looking for an escape route, a way to regain control of the situation. It's too late for that. I've crossed the line. It's never too late, James said, taking a small step forward. 34 years on the force? I've seen people come back from worse, but you have to make the choice now. For a long moment, silence hung in the air. James could hear his own heartbeat, steady despite the gun pointed at his chest. Then slowly, Grayson's shoulders sagged. I'm so tired, he whispered. I know, James said gently. I know you are. They'll lock me up and throw away the key. I'll personally make sure you get the help you need. Veteran to veteran, that's a promise. The moment stretched, taut with possibility. Then Grayson slowly lowered his weapon. Your explosive devices, James said quietly. Are they real? Grayson shook his head. Just realistic fakes, except... He hesitated. The one on the emergency exit door. That one's live. Remote detonator in my pocket. James nodded. I need that detonator, Richard. Grayson reached slowly into his pocket and pulled out a small device which he carefully handed to James. It was never supposed to go this far, he said. I just wanted someone to listen. I'm listening now, James said, accepting the detonator, with one hand while signaling to his team with the other. And I'll keep listening. The tactical team moved in smoothly, securing Grayson without unnecessary force. As they led him away, he looked back at James. Thank you, he said simply. Outside the hospital, cheers erupted as the hostages emerged safely. News cameras captured the moment, their lights bright in the evening darkness that had fallen during the 4-hour standoff. James avoided the cameras, focusing instead on coordinating with medical personnel to ensure all hostages received proper care. The elderly man with the oxygen tank, the young boy, now reunited with his frantic parents. The nurse with the injured arm, each one safe, each one alive. As the last ambulance pulled away, the police commissioner approached James. Remarkable work, Lieutenant, he said, clapping James on the shoulder. No casualties, textbook hostage resolution. The mayor wants to give you a commendation. James shook his head. The team deserves the credit. They executed the plan perfectly. Your plan, Wilson, your leadership. The commissioner glanced toward Captain Reynolds, who stood off to the side being questioned by reporters. I think it's time we had a serious conversation about the department's leadership structure. The next morning, James walked into the station to find officers stopping their work to applaud him. Officer Chen grinned and offered a salute. Officer Rodriguez handed him a newspaper. The headline read, Veteran officer saves lives after department tried to force him out. The story detailed both James's public humiliation at the police demonstration and his masterful handling of the hostage crisis. The reporter had interviewed several officers who spoke anonymously about Reynolds's treatment of James and other older officers. Later that day, James was called to the commissioner's office. Reynolds was there, along with the mayor and the department's legal counsel. Captain Reynolds has been placed on administrative leave pending a full review of his conduct, the commissioner announced without preamble. Lieutenant Wilson, we'd like to offer you a new position as the department's tactical training director. James blinked in surprise. Sir, you've demonstrated exceptional leadership and tactical knowledge, the commissioner continued. This department needs your expertise. The position would allow you to share your experience while keeping you out of the day-to-day patrol operations, given your age. James considered the offer. It wasn't perfect, but it was recognition, respect. I have one condition, he said finally. The commissioner raised an eyebrow. Yes? The department implements mandatory cultural sensitivity training alongside tactical instruction. We need to address the underlying issues that allowed the situation with Reynolds to develop in the first place. The mayor shifted uncomfortably, but the commissioner nodded. Done, he said, extending his hand. As James shook it, he thought about the retirement papers still sitting on his desk. They could stay there a while longer. He still had work to do, lessons to teach, changes to make. And when he did finally, Retire it would be on his terms with his dignity intact and his legacy secured.